between English and Spanish. Así que también recuerde que por favor mantenga la interpretación, su función de interpretación activa durante el resto del evento. So please keep your interpretation on for the rest of the event. Si se está conectando desde su teléfono, por favor, if you are connecting using your phone, por favor haga clic en los tres puntitos. En la parte baja derecha de su pantalla, please click on the three dots at the bottom right of your screen. Luego haga clic en interpretación de lenguaje and then click on language interpretation. Y luego haga clic en español and then click on English. Para finalizar, haga clic en done. And to finalize this, click on done. And now, if you're using it, we're doing a sound check right now. Ahora mismo vamos a hacer una verificación de sonido. Si está escuchando a mi colega Bruje Fuego, por favor déjenos saber en el chat box con un sí. If you're listening to my colleague Bruje Fuego right now, please let us know with the yes. Si le está escuchando, if you're listening to them. Y si no le está escuchando, por favor, déjenos saber con un no en el chat box. Y vamos a estar con ustedes próximamente. And then we're going to be with you soon, if you are not listening to the interpretation. Y ahora voy a continuar en español, and now I'm going to continue in Spanish. Nosotros somos Cooperativa Brújulas, trabajando con el lenguaje, justicia del lenguaje y sanación. Estamos aquí hoy desde tierra taína y personas negras en Borique, Puerto Rico. Así que como parte de estos, nosotros honramos a la naturaleza y nuestros ancestres. Y así que vamos a hacer una serie de recordatorios usando las direcciones y los elementos. Y comenzamos con el este. El elemento es el viento, el aire. Y les recordamos que mantenga sus ritmos y pausas al hablar. Luego nos movemos al sur, donde el elemento es el agua. Les recordamos que Cooperativa Brújulas utiliza el lenguaje inclusivo porque reconocemos la diversidad y fluidez de géneros que existen en nuestras comunidades. Luego nos movemos al oeste, donde el elemento es la tierra. Y les recordamos que mantenga su voz cerca de su micrófono. Esto nos ayuda a hacer una interpretación más enraizada. Finalmente nos movemos al norte, donde el elemento es el fuego. Les recordamos que hable con el lenguaje desde su corazón. Reconocemos que en Cooperativa Brújulas, el español en inglés es solamente 2 lenguajes y es limitado a toda la diversidad de lenguajes que existen en nuestras comunidades y por eso lo reconocemos y estamos trabajando con eso. Hasta aquí llega la presentación. Se la paso de nuevo a Sara y muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mio. I'll go ahead and send you to the Spanish universe right now.
Gracias.
Gracias, Mio. Te voy a enviar ahora a la galaxia.
Hold on one second, sorry. Okay, there you go, Mio. All right, thank you, everyone. I think we are all set up. My name is Sarah Scruggs. I work with the Northern California Land Trust, one of the members of the California Community Land Trust Network. We're very excited to have you all here today to talk about the housing assistance that is coming out of Senate Bill 91. We know that it's fast and it's confusing. We are still confused. So we have some folks here today to help us muddle together through the confusion so that we can have as much information as possible. for us as community land trusts, residents, community members and other allies to know how to access this assistance and get it to the people that really need it. And I'm going to hand this off really quickly to my boss and colleague, Ian Winters, who kind of birthed the idea for this workshop. So go ahead, Ian, brief intro.
Oh, just thank you, and it's heartening to see everyone, and especially thank you to Jessica Hayes from HCD for agreeing to come and talk with us and help present what's happening on the state level, and our colleague in the Bay Area, Joanne Karshmer from All Home, who has been an invaluable and enormous presence in the organizing and strategizing about how all the overlapping layers of this work and go together and how we can best help all of our communities. So with that, I'll pass it back to Sarah.
Thank you, Ian. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. All right. And Joanne, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and start. If folks have questions, we will take them at the end of both presentations, but you can feel free to put them in the chat as you think of them. And Joanne, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Sarah and Ian, for the opportunity to be here this morning and talk more about the rental assistance programs that are all getting underway right now, both at the state and the local levels. As Ian mentioned, I am the Chief Impact Officer at All Home. We're a regional organization that works on solutions that involve reductions to homelessness, reductions to racial disparity in the people who are becoming homeless, as well as trying to create both housing options and economic mobility options for those who have the lowest incomes among us in the Bay Area. So we had been, before the federal money, and we'll get into a little bit of the legislative history in a moment, before the recent rounds of COVID relief money started, we had been working with jurisdictions in the Bay Area on a regional homelessness prevention network. And so it was kind of a natural nexus for us to continue to work with them when the new resources began to flow from the federal government. So if you want to go ahead to the next slide, Sarah, I'll start a little bit on kind of how we got where we are now. So I don't want to throw around too many, ABs and SBs and legislative numbers, because it's relevant for those of us who are in this work every day to kind of have those kinds of benchmarks. But the reality is that the state took really protective action for people last year. I actually shy away from calling, a lot of times people will refer to it as an eviction moratorium. I actually don't. I think it's eviction protection, and it's very important, but there are, even as we speak, there are evictions that proceed in the Bay Area and across the state during the pandemic. But the protections were strong, and the state stepped in to say that people should not be being evicted during the pandemic for non-payment of rent. And essentially those protections stood from earlier in the pandemic through January 31st with AB 3088, which was the initial bill that provided protections. It also required that the tenant communicate with the landlord that they were having a COVID-related impact to their household, which was preventing them from paying either their full rent or any rent, and that in order to continue to have that protection after January 31st, the tenant would have had to pay 25% of their rent from September through January. And that would have afforded protection during that time period, as well as for a time period or through that time period. Then at that time, the state, wasn't able to set up a concurrent rental assistance program. But many of the local jurisdictions stepped forward with their federal relief money or privately raised funds, either through direct fundraising to from their residents or from philanthropic organizations, to set up local rental assistance programs to help people pay that 25% to maintain those protections if they couldn't pay that on their own, or just to help them kind of through the economic shock of the pandemic and their subsequent income loss. Next slide. So at the end of last year, in late December, there was another coronavirus relief bill that was passed, which included $25 billion in rental relief, which is referred to as, a lot of people will say the US Treasury funds or the ERAP funds, Emergency Rental Assistance Program. And those were released to the state and to local cities and counties that had more than 200,000 in population in late January. So California overall received $2.6 billion in those federal funds. And, it was split between the state getting about 1.5 billion and the local cities and counties getting about 1.1 billion. And at that point, the local jurisdictions began to plan how they were going to use that $1.1 billion and deploy their direct allocations for rental assistance in their jurisdictions. Next slide. So at the same time, the state was also grappling with the fact, and many advocates, including All Home and others, were, very concerned, obviously, about the expiration of the protections in AB 3088, which, as I said earlier, would have expired on January 31st of this year. And so there was the introduction of SB 91, and that included both an extension of the eviction protections that were included in AB 3088, but it also established the state's rental assistance program. And I'm sure Jessica will go into more detail about the state's program specifically, but it set up 3 options for city and county governments that had already gotten a direct allocation of funds from the federal government. And it also laid out how those cities could or couldn't use those funds. So if you could go to the next slide. So the requirements in SB 91 stabilize low-income households through primarily payment of rental arrears to the landlords that are owed back rent and some prospective rent. And again, I will let Jessica talk about the specifics, but
voy a dejar a Jess.
The eligibility for households is set by the statute at the federal level, 80% of AMI, prioritizing those under 50% of AMI. And then the state statute laid out that participating landlords, if they were interested, would be compensated 80% of the back rent And then they would accept that as full payment for rental debt of the period from April to March 31st. And the other 20% for the tenant would be forgiven. And then if the landlord was not interested in voluntarily participating, the eligible household or tenant could receive 25% of the back rent owed for that period, which would entitle them to the protections of the bill and not being evicted for non-payment through June 30th of this year. Next slide. So, you know, given that All Home was working with jurisdictions on these, both on their CARES Act rental assistance programs, as well as on a kind of a broader regional homelessness prevention strategy in the Bay Area, we felt really strongly that these funds, whether they were being allocated to the local governments, cities and counties, or to the state, should, you know, marry those two goals. That you know, we want the Bay Area, and I know there are people from other parts of the state on the call, but I'll focus on the Bay Area since that's where our organization works primarily. You know, we between 2017 and 2019 had a significant increase in homelessness. We had in the 2019 point in time count, which is a count that is done on a single night in January usually, we had over 35,000 people that were homeless in the Bay Area, most of whom were unsheltered. And so we feel very strongly that we can't not have these two goals be tied together, and that the targeting has to be not just for rental assistance, but to those who are most likely and most vulnerable to homelessness. So, so when the state, when SB 91 was passed, the state within that piece of legislation gave jurisdictions three options. Either the state could administer both the state portion of the federal assistance and the local portion of the assistance according to the statute, or local governments could take both the local portion that they were directly allocated and the state's portion for their jurisdiction, and they could administer a program also by the elements required of SB 91, or local governments could administer a local program with its own priorities and elements with their own direct allocation from the federal government, and the state would retain that jurisdiction's state block grant and operate the state's program in that same jurisdiction. So there was also another option that came about kind of after the three initial options, where jurisdictions could run their local program and then later also administer the state funds according to the requirements of SB 91. So all that is very confusing. It's confusing for you know, those of us that work in the space. It's confusing, I think, for the local jurisdictions, and certainly it can have the potential, if we are not working in close coordination with the state, to be confusing for tenants and landlords on the ground once the programs are up and running. Next slide. So in working with the local jurisdictions, we you know, there were several concerns that All Home had and I should say that the decision, because there's so much urgency, both in the timeline of the statute to spend the money, it has to be 65% obligated by September 1st of this year, or the federal government can start recapturing it and reallocating it to other jurisdictions. So because there's a lot of time sensitivity to the spending of the money, and frankly, there's so much urgency among tenants and landlords who are in dire financial straits, you know, all of us, the state, the local governments are all working at top speed. And so the decisions about what was right for the community, option A, B, or C, was also super compressed. And what we were concerned about, and the jurisdictions that we were working with were concerned about, was that in the SB 91 program, the targeting perhaps did not go deep enough to households that were most vulnerable to housing insecurity, and specifically who might be most at risk of homelessness. And the emphasis was really on, at least in this initial tranche of funding. Now, I know the state is very open to, you know, as more federal funding becomes available, very open to looking to forward rent and stabilization. But right now, with this program, it's primarily based on payment of rental arrears rather than prospective housing stabilization. And so that was a concern. And then really the primary concern, I think, were that the structure put tenants in two different situations based on whether their landlord was going to be willing to participate or not willing to participate. And, you know, there were particular concerns about people living in rent-controlled units who had, you know, had landlords that had been offering them buyout packages to vacate the property even before the pandemic, and, you know, how that might incentivize those particular landlords to not accept 80% payment in order to, you know, have the rent controlled unit turnover and go back to market-based rent. And the other thing that, you know, I think the flexibility of a local program offers, and we've seen with, you know, programs like Keep Oakland House and Destination Home, is the statute is clear that, you know, 90% of the funds need to be used for rental and utility expenses. And so there are a lot of situations that, you know, where a tenant is not in a formal leasehold. We know that, you know, 40% of the people who become homeless are in an informal living situation prior to becoming homeless. And just overall, we were concerned that it was going to leave the folks that were most vulnerable to not having as many options to retain their housing as we could do with a local program. Okay, next slide. So these I won't go through. I'm sure Sarah can share these slides with the group after the fact, but they're just charts that say, you know, which jurisdiction chose which option, how much money they have to be either using in their local program, or if the state is doing a concurrent state program on their behalf. As you can see in option C, there's a number of jurisdictions where that is the case. And then just talking about who, you know, which organization is kind of leading the effort, and, you know, the amount of funds that will be available, and some information about the targeting of the programs. Next slide. So I didn't have as much information on LA, and hopefully Jessica can fill in a little bit about the status of some of those programs. But I did just kind of give the skeletal information about the about some of the information for the LA area, at least LA County and the cities within LA County. So you can see there's a lot of federal funding coming to the Bay Area and to the rest of the state, frankly, but in LA and in the Bay Area, there's a lot of assistance money that's going to be available in the very near term, both, you know, through the state program as well as through some other local programs that will be operating. It looks like in LA, there wasn't as much movement toward having an option C local program as there was in the Bay Area. But we look forward to working with the state. The state's been a willing partner to hear from the jurisdictions that are operating local programs or interested in further targeting, and also kind of working with us on how the state program will work and where we can be collaborative. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jessica, and or I'm happy to answer questions before we do that, however you want to do it, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Joanne. I will go ahead and take us off sharing, and we can go ahead. There are some questions that have been put in the chat. Diana asked about why preferring option A to option B, but Diana, do you feel like that was sufficiently answered already?
So thank you for letting me ask my question. So I was really interested, you did sort of answer it in the subsequent slide. However, San Mateo County was listed as not having an agency. So I'm in the spirit of full disclosure, I'm a city council member in Redwood City, which is in San Mateo County. And both Redwood City and San Mateo County have very progressive programs for supporting rental assistance programs, as well as supporting our homeless, and trying to get them housing and services. So I was interested in seeing that San Mateo County's choice was option C.
That might have been a typo, Diana. They're doing option A.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that, because we do have a robust program, and I can't imagine them letting the state tell us what to do. Okay, so again, is when on that first slide where you said that option A was preferred, are you saying that Home for All prefers option A, or that is the preference of most jurisdictions? So that's, I guess, my question. And
yeah, I guess I would let Jessica kind of touch on that when she speaks. It's just that, you know, for All Home, we were working with a number of jurisdictions that already had very strong infrastructure in terms of homelessness prevention. They had well-established networks that not only did CARES Act programs, but also had previous existing very targeted homelessness prevention networks that had, you know, skilled nonprofit providers that have been doing this work for quite a while. And so in those jurisdictions, we were advocating that if they had the ability and the infrastructure, that option C would be an okay choice for them, because, you know, it was building on something that already existed and could be strengthened, and could actually, like I said in my presentation, bring those missions of preventing more homelessness prevention, and rental assistance together. And so, but that doesn't exist everywhere, right? And option A and option B, that's a whole different story, and I'll let Jessica talk about that. Option A is a very good option for, and like off the top, jurisdictions that are below 200,000 in population, we're automatically going to have a state administered program. And I think that's a great, I think that's a very positive step. They're smaller, they don't have necessarily a really strong built out nonprofit community that could implement. But there, so I guess the state had some reasons for wanting, you know, and I think primarily, I'll let, again, Jessica, around clarity and limiting confusion and duplication, which are important in this, very important in this process. But All Home was only advocating for option C where it really made sense for the jurisdiction. And it didn't make sense for everyone.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And you're saying that San Mateo County was C or A?
My understanding is they're A, but Jessica would be able to
Okay.
confirm.
Okay, that makes sense because we do have a robust program and in many of our jurisdictions, and the county has a robust program. So, okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. We have one more question that was in the chat. Is there a place online to search these government funds and options for our own jurisdictions in Southern California?
You want me to go ahead and take that one?
Yeah, I'm not a Southern California person, so I'll let Jessica handle that one.
Yeah, so we have we kind of have two different places where we are keeping our information, and we have one place that is very much focused on information for tenants and landlords who are really just want to figure out what the landscape looks like, and that is on the housing is key. And then we have the information that we've been working with all of our partner jurisdictions. We didn't want to confuse folks by just dumping it all in one place because jurisdiction information tends to be very jargonistic. I don't know that there's another way around it considering how complicated a lot of the issues are. So we have another place where we have a list of all of the jurisdictions and how much money they've received and what option they have selected, and to kind of indicate who's going to be running their programs. And that is getting updated almost every day as we get more information and we work with folks to kind of fine tune what they're doing with their programs and to add information in there. And that is, I could post a link to that document in the chat for folks if that would be helpful. And you can take a look and see, you know, where your jurisdiction fits and how much money was directly allocated from the federal government, and then how much money was reserved from the state government, and then who's going to be operating it.
Okay, so I am going to go ahead and pull up Jessica's presentation now. We're already jumping into it. This is great. Nice flow. So hold on one second. Okay, Jessica, go ahead.
So hi, my name is Jessica Hayes. I'm a federal program specialist with the California Department of Housing and Community Development, and I'm the specialist that's been assigned to this program. I want to start off by saying Joanne did a really good job of explaining the complexity of the different layers of legislation that has kind of led to this program that has set the framework. It is complicated and it is not a smooth progression. It's very choppy. And so, you know, we absolutely recognize that that is not necessarily the easiest or the best way to make sense of a challenging program in the first place. But I just want to say thank you for doing, you know, you did a really good job. So it was not an easy, it's not been a necessarily easy progression, but we do have a good plan moving forward. So I think we can go ahead and jump right into that. So we can just touch very briefly on the legislative background. You know, as Joanne mentioned, we had the AB 3088, and that was the structure that provided those tenant protections. And I think she's absolutely right to not use the word moratorium because they are protections. They're not a straight up moratorium. And that has been, you know, we tried to be more consistent with that, especially after receiving some very, very useful tenant feedback. And then the SB 91, which is really the legislation that facilitated the money that was coming from the federal treasury for emergency rental assistance. So this was the state legislation. I will say one thing that Joanne did mention is that the SB 91 legislation had a very, very clear, very defined process for rental arrears. We really kind of view that as a permanent solution for the rental arrears scenario that a lot of households are facing. It did not have a kind of final solution approach for folks who are still currently unable to pay rents. So we recognize that that was sort of a temporary fix, right? It has a mechanism to help folks take advantage of the rental protections in AB 3088, but it doesn't actually solve the current rents problem. And I think one of the reasons that the legislature took that approach is that we were fairly certain that there was going to need to be more money to address this problem. When we have looked at the data, the scope of the problem in California was so much larger than $2.6 billion. And that without additional money, we would be very quickly in a very similar scenario, just a little bit farther down the road. So I think that was kind of the legislature, hedging on this additional fund, these additional funds coming out. And it does look like there will be more money available probably in the next 30 to 60 days coming out of the next stimulus package, provided they can get that through Congress. So she's absolutely right about that structure. And I think I just wanted to give a little bit of additional background on that, if that's helpful. Go to the next one. So again, Joanne did a great job to kind of describing the option A, option B, and option C. I can give a little bit of reasoning around option A. Option A was really intended for jurisdictions who either had not run a program or didn't have capacity to ramp up as quickly as they needed to push out the amount of money that they were going to receive. And there were a lot of jurisdictions that had really good, solid programs that they had been running with either their COVID relief funds or with ESG funds or with their CDBG funds. But when they looked at the volume of funding that was going to come out of the emergency rental assistance program, they kind of looked at their staff and said, can you do this? And not in the timeline that needed to happen. And so option A was really, that option was available for jurisdictions who felt that they needed a little bit more support. And it would allow us to kind of do this leveraged effort, right? A very consistent leveraged effort. Option B was for jurisdictions who, when they looked at this money, they said, yeah, we can do this. We can ramp up. We've got an established program. We've been running it. We ran a bunch of our COVID funding through that program. We can absorb this additional money. We have the capacity to do it. And it's worth it to conform to the state rules to make sure that we can push that out. And then option C, as Joanne mentioned, this was really for jurisdictions who had an established program and had very, very specific targeting and local needs, and wanted to maintain that targeting and those local needs, and wanted to continue to run their program and absorb their federal funds and push those out at their timeline as quickly as they could to maintain that targeting, and then really use the state's reservation as kind of like the backup funding, right? To come in on either on top or behind, either which way, their program to help make sure that they had a kind of a broader reach, but then allow that local jurisdiction to maintain their targeting and to maintain their intention. So I hope that kind of helps a little bit with the description of those different options. And then the next slide is just it doesn't give you a ton of detail, and my font slid off the side, but it's a list of all the different jurisdictions who are, and what option they have selected, right? So the option A jurisdictions, it is all of the smaller counties, and then it is each of the cities and counties. And each city and county in this list has a member who is participating on our advisory committee. So we have set up an advisory committee for them to help us make sure that we are messaging correctly, that we're getting the information out correctly, that we're including the right partners, that we're engaging the way we need to engage. And that advisory committee meets every 2 weeks. And then we have a weekly meeting with the members of the Southern California jurisdictions, and then the members of the Bay Area jurisdictions. So we have these kind of targeted subcommittee meetings with them every week to make sure that we're continuing on our messaging is consistent and we're on target. And then we have a list of the option B. As you can see, it's a lot of the larger cities, larger counties, folks who had been running really robust programs and could absorb the funding. And then we have our option C jurisdictions, and those are the folks who are really looking to do that deeper targeting, and who we will be coordinating with on a kind of a longer term basis to make sure that we can deploy funding in support of their program and make sure they can continue to operate efficiently. So hopefully this provides a little bit of context. I think below San Joaquin County, I've got Sonoma County and Stanislaus County, just so that you can kind of see the whole list of those option Bs. So go ahead and jump into the state program. So this is really, this part of the conversation, I'm really going to focus on the option A category, kind of what we're looking at the state program. One of the goals with the option A and the option B is that those programs all have the same base rules. And so it allows us to be very, kind of do a lot of interchange with our marketing, right? And share a lot of our marketing and messaging. And then with our option C jurisdictions, we'll be working with them to create some cohesive marketing and some cohesive messaging around their programs as well, so that we can do our very best to limit confusion. Because I think if you start with the legislation, it looks really confusing. And what it needs to be on the back end, or I mean on the front end, for folks who are actually going to be accessing the program, it needs to not be confusing, right? It needs to be very accessible and very, very easy. So the focus of the program, really our intent here, is to stabilize households and make sure that folks can stay housed for as long as possible, and then to make sure that they get protections and relief from the economic and social impacts of COVID-19. There are a few kind of core criteria that come out of the federal legislation. So a household must at least be 80% of area median income. And there's a couple of different ways that we can check that. And we're looking to make sure that we've made the income pieces as simple as possible for folks. And then the household must have a COVID-19 impact. This is one of the issues with the federal legislation, where they didn't provide a lot of guidance on that. So we are taking a very kind of open approach to that impact. I think it's really hard for anyone to say they have not been impacted by COVID-19 at this point. Everyone has been impacted by COVID-19. So really talking about what, just giving folks a lot of opportunities to say, this was my impact and this is how it has affected me. So going to the next one. So as Joy mentioned, participating landlords, if a landlord is going to engage in a program and work with the state and work with the tenant, they get 80% of their unpaid arrears. So, if a household has not paid anything towards rent, and there are a lot of households who've been unable to pay anything for a while, that means that landlord gets 80% of what he would have otherwise been owed and will be forgiving 20%. If a household has been paying something, that 80% shrinks, right? So it's just 80% of whatever is unpaid. So if a household's been able to pay 25% of their rents, the landlord is not forgiving 20%, he's forgiving 15%. So the more that a household has been able to pay over time, the more that difference does shrink. And we did that with the intent of really hoping to engage as many landlords as possible, but also trying to stretch funding as far as we absolutely could. If a landlord declines to participate, funds can go directly to a tenant, and they go to the tenant at the rate to engage with that AB 3088 tenant protection. So the goal there was to really make sure that a tenant had the eviction protections necessary to keep them housed. There's also good documentation, right? So if a tenant has engaged with us and we have been, and funds were paid to the tenant, that is documented in a way to help the tenant kind of defend against eviction proceedings also. So there is a lot of hopes that as we move forward into the program, especially as new money comes out, that we can start to get a little deeper into the assistance in this particular field. And then the program does prioritize rental and utility arrears. And again, as I mentioned, we approach this from a permanent versus temporary sort of scenario, where we wanted to really make sure we did the best we could to address the arrears with a permanent solution. And then, really working for future funding to kind of come back in and come up with a permanent solution for current and prospective rents. So I think one of the things that Joy mentioned in her presentation is that the jurisdictions who are running option Cs are working with really strong local partner networks. And that is really the best process. It's really the only way to do this effectively and make sure that you can reach everybody that needs to be reached. So we are following that model. We are working with local initiatives, group to make sure that we put together a very strong, very cohesive network of nonprofit partners who are spread out throughout the option A jurisdictions. And then we're also going to be working with partners, a lot of the same partners that are option C jurisdictions are working with in those option C jurisdictions to make sure that we have a very, very cohesive network. And the goal of this particular component to the program will be to get in and do as much deeper targeting as we can, make sure that folks who are kind of struggling with digital divide have access to funds, have access to the program, to make sure that we are reaching marginalized, otherwise marginalized neighborhoods who don't necessarily have resources or have access to these resources, who may not even know that they're available. And then really to provide a feedback loop for us so that if we're missing the target, we can find that out early and adjust appropriately. So we have started to put together the network list. I think we have our first 22 partners signed up, and they're mostly under that tier 1, but we have a few tier 2s, but we're signing up and getting partners engaged on a regular basis. So that list is going to be growing substantially. I think we're targeting somewhere around 200 total partners in this effort before we're at full steam. The other part of this of the state's kind of program is a very, very robust outreach and education. And we have contracted with a marketing firm and working with them to make sure that we get good messaging and that our messaging is consistent, that our messaging is versatile, so that if an option B jurisdiction wants to use our messaging, or if an option C jurisdiction wants to build on our messaging, that is available to them for them to do that. And then also making sure that that if we find out we aren't hitting a neighborhood, or we aren't hitting a jurisdiction, or we're not hitting a population the way that we need to make sure that we're addressing their impacts, that we have the tools to go in and adjust our message so that we can actually reach as many people as possible who have been impacted. So they're working on toolkits. Some have already been kind of developed and have been started to be distributed among our different option A jurisdictions. But as we go, there'll be a lot more toolkits being put together and distributed out amongst our partners. So this is kind of an overview of the program operations, and I'll go through this slide pretty quickly, but then I'll jump into the next one because it has a little bit more of a specific kind of flow for this. But the operation of the state's program really starts with a centralized platform, a centralized opportunity for folks to engage. And our very first step in that centralization is going to be a type of sorting and filtering and redirecting, so that any household from any jurisdiction, if they put their information, their address information, no personal information, just their address, into the state's program, it will reroute them to the appropriate jurisdiction. So if they belong in the state's program, they'll move forward. If they need to go to an option B jurisdiction, there will be a seamless rerouting to that option B jurisdiction's application. And if they are for an option C jurisdiction, there will be a seamless rerouting to that option C jurisdiction's information. So that's really our first step to make sure that we do the best we can to limit confusion and make sure that the programs across the state, regardless of who's operating them, are promoted and are accessible to folks who are in need. So we have the centralized online portal. The portal will be available for both landlords to apply and tenants to apply. And it doesn't matter if you're a landlord or a tenant, you can access the full range of protections, right? So if a tenant applies and their landlord cooperates, they can get that 80%. The portal will provide guidance to help applicants prepare their documents. We'll have kind of document lists ahead of time. We are taking a very, very inclusive approach to the documentation and including attestations, allowing households to just say, we attest that this is our scenario, and we don't necessarily have a hard copy document that we can show you, but this is our reality. So, accepting those attestations as a potential document. As I mentioned, the portal will route applicants to their appropriate jurisdiction. That will happen very, very early in the process. We're trying to maintain a very transparent eligibility screening so that folks can identify whether or not this is the right program for them right off the get-go, and have that be early instead of late, so that folks don't put in a bunch of personal information or complete a exhaustive application process only to be told no. That is not what we want to have happen. That is super discouraging. And if folks go through the screening process and are, for whatever reason, are screened as ineligible, that is not a no for them. That is here's a phone number to call, and here's some other resources to see if the information you were putting in was the right information, and that so that you weren't necessarily screened out incorrectly. We're really looking to maintain the minimal amount of personal information. We want to protect people's identities, protect people's privacy, and just maintain a high security system. And then again, as we talked about the landlord engagement, we'll be doing case management. So, there will be folks who can smooth right on through the application because they may have all of their documents available, or they may be able to get all of their information together quickly. There may be folks who need assistance. And so there will be both that local partner network and case management to help folks get through the application system. And then, we're proposing the application in many different languages. There's accessibility assistance, live in-person tutorials. There'll be a lot of information to help make sure that folks have what they need to get through that application. So this slide kind of goes through the application process, and I just elected to do a tenant initiated application. There's a landlord initiated application, and it really just switches the first two positions in the application. There is a lot of similarity between the two. But if a tenant completes the application, a completed application gets routed to a landlord validates, and or utilities, right? Because we are also assisting with utilities. They validate that that's the right information, that they are actually the landlord, that they own the property. And then the application goes into a review where it is evaluated to make sure that it hits all of the target points and that there were no critical questions left unanswered. If there are questions, there's case management that will engage with the applicants to make sure that the information gets completed. And then once an application is approved, it gets routed for payment, and we're doing direct deposit as well as paper checks, so folks can kind of pick which way works for them. There will be, again, case management and local partners to help folks, navigate banking if they haven't done that before. This gives them an opportunity to navigate that sphere as well. And then there's a notification, and it's a robust notification that the payment was issued, it was received, checks were cashed, money was deposited, and for what periods and who was assisted, and all of the notification that you would need to take to an eviction court and support your place, right? Support your claim. So that is kind of the overarching application flow. I think I have one more slide. I do. So we'll talk a little bit about the timeline for the state's program. So the state's program, we're working on staffing up the call center right now. That was actually the call I was on right before this call. So we're working to get that set up. I'm hoping to have that open in the next week to start taking questions and start helping folks kind of get prepared for the application. We're doing our communications ramp up, so you're going to be seeing a lot more information in the next week about this program. March 15th is our target date to open our application and start receiving applications. Our applications are not strictly first come, first serve. There is some prioritization and some targeting. And so the round one priorities are really going to be focusing on households, lower income households, 50% of AMI and below, to help make sure that we reach that most vulnerable group first. And then inside of that targeting, we're proposing a deeper layer of targeting for households who have been unable to pay any rents, to target them even with a higher level of priority, so that we can get their tenant protections in place. We can get their eviction protections in place as quickly as possible. In April, we're going to continue to kind of rolling through the applications. There will be more education, more outreach. We'll continue to add partners to our local network. as we expand, and that will become doubly true if more money gets added in either late March or early April from the federal government for another round of stimulus. And then we will start to open up to round 2 priorities, which will be geographically targeted on areas that have had disproportionate impacts due to COVID. And some of those are going to be in our rural communities. I know that Imperial County has just been hit so hard. And so they will be one of our areas that we'll very, very much be focusing on, but then also LA County hit very, very hard. We'll be looking at areas to make sure that we're getting the deepest penetration possible into those neighborhoods where they've been so severely impacted. And then May and beyond, we're going to continue with our outreach, continue with our support with our local programs and our partners. We'll continue to receive applications and process payments until we've run out of money. And hopefully additional funds do come through quickly enough that we can keep this open and keep this running until we have really helped as many people as we can in terms of who needs assistance. So that is sort of an overview of what is actually a much more involved program, but hopefully to provide some kind of background and to start the conversation. We are still working with some of the design components of this program. We have our application mostly designed. We have a lot of our communications and outreach, but in every conversation we've had with different groups, we've received really valuable feedback to help us do a good job of designing this. And so I'm always open to hearing from folks that can help us make sure that we are understanding the problem correctly and that we're doing the best to approach the problem with the right series of solutions. So I think that's it. And I'm looking at the chat. It looks like there's a few questions.
Yeah, some of them Joanne and Oscar were answering. I'm going to go back. Could you share the different languages this campaign is coming out in?
Yeah, so we have, we're still working on the full list, but I think right now we are looking at definitely Spanish, Chinese. We're looking at both the Mandarin and the Cantonese, Vietnamese. We're also looking at Hmong, and I think Russian right now. There is a list that we're working on to get a better idea of the different geographies in the state where we need to add additional language support, because it's not, languages are not necessarily spread evenly, and urban areas have different needs than some of the rural areas. So we're still putting together the list, but I believe we're targeting at a minimum like the top 20 languages spoken in the state. And the application software, I believe, is structured for up to 60 different languages. So it has a translation feature that will be supported in up to 60 different languages. And then our case management will also be supporting kind of matched languages to the application.
And this question may have been answered, but someone who lives in Oakland, where will they be able to apply and know if they're qualified?
So in fact, I just accepted a meeting request. We're working with the city of Oakland to really get a good idea of what their program looks like and what populations they will be serving. And so when we have that information fleshed out and we've got our agreements with Oakland in place, there will be a mechanism to direct folks either to the city of Oakland if they are going to be eligible for that deeper targeting, or to the state's program. And we'll work as hard as we can to keep that seamless. So, that's not an easy answer question. It will depend on really on the city's program. Where are they targeting? And then, kind of our coordination with the city to make sure that folks get to the right place.
If I could just add something to that, since we're actually working actively with Oakland and other jurisdictions in the Bay Area. So we're working on and we'll also be launching a kind of a regional data platform portal that will include Oakland. It'll include San Francisco. It'll include the city of Fremont. We're still talking to a couple other local jurisdictions about their preference for their local program data platform. But in Oakland, the city council has already awarded funds to 4 providers. in terms of the treasury dollars. So I can put those organizations in the chat, but there will be an umbrella that serves, you know, as the Oakland program, and then it'll allocate the applications among the providers that they've chosen to implement the program in Oakland.
Okay, great, thank you. Next question, for tenants who pay rent to a master tenant and not directly to a property owner or property management company, what do they need to do?
So I'm going to kind of reframe that this is a sublease scenario where someone is subleasing a unit from another tenant. So that is one of the more challenging components of navigating within the SB 91 structure. SB 91 did not really speak to that. And so we're working to put together some policies. I think, you know, the core challenge there is that the landlord is the entity that does need to be paid. And that's really established in the federal language. That's in the federal act that you know, you could make a payment to a tenant who is subleasing to another tenant, but then you have to make sure that that tenant pays the landlord, because the landlord has the ability to evict everyone. So we're working on a navigation on that to help make sure that we structure it in a way that the funding gets to the entity that can actually prevent the eviction. And that is not necessarily the tenant who is subleasing to another tenant, right? It's the landlord that needs to be addressed. So that one's not a very simple or straightforward answer. And I think that that's been a challenge that all of the jurisdictions have kind of looked at in light of the federal guidance, like how do we navigate that? Because there are a lot of households in that scenario.
Next question, is there an enforcement mechanism in place?
There's a few. So when you say enforcement, I'm going to first approach the landlord forgiveness piece, because I think that's been one of the big concerns, is how are we going to make sure that landlords who have accepted funding, that we can enforce that forgiveness of that unpaid debt. And that comes through the application. There will be if there's certifications, attestations, and then it will also be on the notification. And then we're working to make sure that we've created a database that can be used by the courts to support a tenant who brings who states that the landlord has accepted rent and forgave back rent and is not, does not have the legal standing to evict on that. So that's one of the kind of enforcement pieces that we're working on. And then we're also building in fraud protection into the system to make sure that people's personal information gets protected. We do not want to have folks who are not eligible for funding misusing personal information and fraudulently taking funding. I think we've kind of all heard the stories about other programs where that's happened, and that's just not allowable. We can't do that. So we're building in the fraud protection, but when we're talking about our program design, I call it threading the needle between making sure that the program is accessible and easy to use for tenants, but also provides security for data and provides prevention against fraud and misuse.
Thank you. What about tenants who rent units that are part residential and part commercial? Can they get the back rent paid for both parts of the unit?
That is a great question. I know for sure on the residential, but let me take that one back. That's a really good question. I'm actually going to make a note and approach that one with our team and see where they land on that. I knew I was going to come up with something good out of this. You guys are great.
And then there is a question here from Noemi that I'm afraid I'm going to butcher if I translate myself into English. Can any of the interpreters read her question? It's the en el link que subiste.
think she wants to know that if the link that that I was sharing is the best link to receive updates. Like Sarah shared earlier, we're still not certain who are the partners that are going to be administering here in Los Angeles. So we're trying to make sure that we're updated as much as possible to keep our community prepared. If the link that we have here is the best tool to use while the city or the partners are selected to administer this fund.
And that's the link, that's the landlordtenant.dre.ca.gov. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, that is the best link right now. And we're going to be really putting a lot more information on that site in the next week. One of the things that is going to be a little bit challenging for folks down in LA. So LA County is working with the state, and the state will be running the program in LA County. LA City is going to be running their own program, and it will be coordinated. You know, they're taking the full amount of funding. It will be coordinated with the state, but they will be taking their own applications. And then the city of Santa Clarita is running their own program. They are running an option C program. So we're going to be working with them to figure out how to structure the state program around that. So it's going to be a little bit on the back end, it's going to be a little bit confusing. We will do our very best to make it as seamless and straightforward on the front end.
I guess just Sarah, I'm just going to ask a follow-up. Is there I guess what can the state do to put kind of like, you know, put the fire on them a little bit so that we get our community prepared? Because, you know, we're talking about a week from now almost, right? And well, I know that it's not first come first serve, so that's great to hear, but we know that there's going to be a digital divide and a language divide, and COVID doesn't help, right? Where we can't be signing up people or supporting people face to face, right? In the fashion that we will probably, this program will best work out. But just wanted to hear like what can the state do to kind of, you know, put that fire.
Well, I will say, and I think Joanne can probably back me up on this, we're all on fire. We're going as absolutely fast as we can. And, you know, I mentioned we've been coordinating. So with LA County, we actually meet with LA County 3 days a week to coordinate and continue our communication. I know LA City is pushing very, very quickly on their programs. They are very, very close to their deployment. Santa Clarita is looking at probably an April 1st start date for their program. They have they're a little bit behind. They have a little bit of room to catch up, but I know their team is working as fast as they can to get their program designed and structured. So I think, you know, staying engaged is the best thing you can do. And, you know, at these kinds of venues where you guys ask these really great questions that I have to go back and say, okay, we need to figure out how to deal with this. This is fantastic. This is the best way to make sure that what we put together really responds to the widest range of folks who have need, right? I think you know, continue to watch and communicate with your local leaders and your city council and your county board of supervisors and your partners there. But I don't really know that there's anything anyone can do to go any faster. So I don't have a great answer for that. Usually I say engage, but at this point, everyone's just going as fast as we can.
Thank you. There was a follow-up to the residential commercial question. What about tenants who received PPP loans for rent on commercial portions?
That actually simplifies it quite a bit. If you have received a PPP loan, then we can do some deduplication there and, you know, suss out the residential piece from the commercial piece and go after the residential piece independently. I think where we would run into challenges is if, and I know that this is a case for a lot of folks, that PPP was insufficient because it covered a very specific discrete period, and the pandemic has gone on far longer than anyone thought it was going to. So in that event, again, that kind of puts us more into a duplication, but I'm going to go back to my team. And I would say watch our marketing. I wouldn't be surprised if you see the answer kind of coming out in there. One thing I will say on kind of this challenge with folks who've already received some assistance, but it wasn't enough, which is going to be a lot of folks, right? A lot of folks received a little bit of assistance early on. It was nowhere near enough. is that we need to be very nuanced in the way that we evaluate who has received assistance so that we address the full need. And we don't just say, oh, well, you got $1,000 back in April, so therefore you've been helped, because that's not reality. Reality is that there's a lot more need than what folks, than what we originally anticipated 6 months ago or 8 months ago when a lot of this funding, when the CARES Act was released. Everyone thought we would be done by August, and that was not reality. So we will be very nuanced in the way that we approach that. And I would say that will be true as we kind of determine how this works with these residential commercial splits also.
Thank you. Many of the non-informal workers rent rooms. Will they qualify for the rental assistance?
So we're trying to build that in. They should, right? If you're renting a room and you're paying rent for a space to live, and you can't make your rent, you should qualify for rental assistance. And I would say that that's not just true of rooms, but also of non-traditional units. So I think we had a really good conversation with folks about what types of units would qualify, and a garage conversion or an accessory dwelling unit or even a mobile home or a motorhome where folks were living in a paying rent on a space. So we're trying to build as much flexibility into the type of unit that can qualify for assistance as possible. And we've kind of foreseen that folks renting a room would definitely fall into that category.
And the last question I see in the chat, and then I'm going to respond to some of the back and forth that's been happening. Could you share a bit more about the media campaign? Any idea where ads are going to be placed in radio and TV?
I do have a little bit. That one is not my forte. So I can tell you what I know, and then I'll tell you what to look for. So the media campaign has radio buys, it has some TV buys, it has a lot of social media buys. So you'll be seeing this popping up in your social media. It also has like going into specific areas for multilingual media. So we'll be advertising in different languages in different neighborhoods. It's very, very targeted that way. There will be, of course, press releases. I'm sure y'all will see probably the governor before too long, and then definitely representatives from local jurisdictions talking about their programs and promoting them that way as well. And then building kits for folks to promote locally, right? So if you're one of the jurisdictions who's kind of part of that state conglomerate, then you will get a kit for you to also promote. And then there's some funding available for jurisdictions to do that local promotion also, to go even deeper than just the statewide media. So I think I know there is more to it than that, but that is the part that I'm aware of.
Thank you. And then there's been some back and forth about, at the beginning of this pandemic, a lot of people were trying to force banks to extend terms of loans and institute true forbearance for the duration of the shutdown. And Bruce, you are very correct that banks are not poor and can't afford it. Plus the Federal Reserve Treasury can certainly print more money to backfill. That is part of, unfortunately, the reality of living in the United States. First of all, there wasn't political will for that on the federal level, and a lot of banks are backed by the Fed. And so those kinds of decisions have to be made at that level. I don't even know if that could pass right now, to be honest, even with a Democratic majority in the Senate and the House and now the White House. There are other countries that actually were able to do that in Europe and other places. So you're correct, we would be having a different conversation if those were the political decisions that had been made early on. And here we are. I did have some thoughts about some other things to share. Oh, yes. So Northern California Land Trust, Bay Area Community Land Trust, Oakland Community Land Trust, Berkeley Tenants Union that's on here, the Vallejo Housing Justice Coalition, Richmond Land, we all submitted a joint application to be some of the partners that will be receiving applications, doing outreach, one-on-one case management for folks. We have gotten word that we have been awarded to be one of those partners. we are still in the place where we don't quite understand how much we have been awarded. We've been given a minimum and then a maximum to be determined. So that's a little in flux right now. It's actually quite frustrating because we made it very clear in our application that we are going to need to be doing hiring to make this possible. And we can't do the hiring with the award letter that we have. So
Right.
we are going to be having that discussion soon, but I just wanted to let folks know that yeah, we're not yet prepared to be fully rolling this out. We have people that are committed to helping us coordinate this whole huge thing that we're doing in our area across 3 different counties, but we don't even know if we could pay them.
So can I just want to make sure I clearly understand, because sometimes I like to go light things up and see if we can get some motion.
Yeah.
So you're talking about an application that you submitted with
LISC.
To LISC. Okay. Noted.
Yeah. And then I input the LACLTs are still waiting to hear on the same program. I think actually, Oscar, you heard that you guys won't be administering, correct?
They shared with us that they have sent, I guess they have a list of priority partners that they're currently working with, and that they're going to be sending notices to other partners to support with the implementation of the program. For our proposal, it was a joint proposal with other community land trusts in the East LA and unincorporated areas, CLT there, with another one in South Central Los Angeles in the Crenshaw corridor, El Sereno area, the Koreatown area, like Beverly, Santa Monica area, ours in South Central Los Angeles. And we also were able to work with the Santa Ana community land trust at Tribe Santa Ana to kind of submit a joint proposal about how we could all partner to support each other as we support our members, right, and our residents. And I also want to say that, despite of that, those proposals, like, we were gonna do this work no matter the circumstance of getting funded or not funded. But getting funded is obviously preferred, because then we can do outreach to our members and be, and have the tools that we need to support and implement this program. But yeah, so this week we have not been selected as an organization, but we're still, again, we're doing the work right now.
Can I offer a little bit of feedback on that I think might help to move forward? So I think one of the biggest challenges in that one is that some of the work that you're doing is county, for Los Angeles County, and we're working very deeply in there, and I think there's a lot of interest in engaging with you on that part. The other part of it is in Los Angeles City. And so maybe what we need to do is have a conversation with the city, and we can come up with an MOU or some agreement with them to have you do this kind of more cohesive operational work. I think the jurisdiction split is where we're having a problem. And so I will follow up with the LISC team on that and see if we can get some feedback to you guys and come up with a path forward, because when you have a good coordination like this, it makes a huge difference in the ability to engage in communities. And if you already have a coordinated network, that makes life a lot easier for everyone.
Just adding that this is like Northern California COT, and all of our COT. We have I think Sarah may have referenced it in IN2, right? But our cohort of community land trusts is strong and growing. We have over 35, I guess, members and emerging members in California, specifically interlinked with other tenant rights advocates and developers and nonprofit housing providers, right? So when we saw this, I guess, a program that was about to launch, it was like, we are a perfect fit, because this is a California state program. And we are, like you're seeing here, we're supporting each other and we're learning from each other, right? And we all have the same interest in making sure that our members are not displaced, that we don't lose any of our homes, right, through this process. But yeah, Jessica, if you're able to support with the coordination, that's super helpful. And there's no, you know, I know the process that Leska's taking is they probably receive a bunch of applications, right? And I know that this program launched super quick, so there's no malintended, you know, pieces on how they're processing this work. It's just like I'm probably gonna email them again next week, like, you know, if you have not made selections yet, like at least let us know what the process looks like, because we got to get our members ready to apply in our you know, residents.
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to speak a little bit out of turn, but I got a reputation for that, so whatever, it is what it is. I think they were a little bit surprised with the response that they got. It was more than they expected, and so it was a lift for them to start to sort through and filter through. But we did kind of warn them that there were some really strong local partner networks, pre-existing local partner networks in California, that there's a huge advantage to coordinating with those networks because they are established. They know the players. They know how to do their outreach. They have dedicated support groups. I mean, we're on a Saturday and y'all are here listening to this. So, you know, it's obviously there's evidence that you've got the support that you need to do to be effective. So I think we just need to have a little bit more conversation internally about how we approach that. And I have made a note for both of these two issues to have a conversation with Lisk this afternoon and see kind of what their path forward is and see what they can communicate back to you. And then Oscar, for your issue specifically, where we've got the city county, or I mean, the city county issue. You know, this is always sort of the challenge when you're looking at a centralized program versus a locally operated program. And I think, you know, Joanne can definitely speak to that as well, that you know, there's benefits to having a centralized program, but then you lose opportunity at the local level. There's opportunity at the local level, but then you lose some of the benefits of a centralized program, right? So trying to satisfy all of those different scenarios is really difficult. So I think, you know, we'll have a follow-up conversation. I have a scheduled meeting with the city of LA next week anyway, so we'll have a little conversation with them and see if there's an opportunity to do some collaboration on our end to help make this more straightforward for you on your end.
Thank you. Going to go back to the questions in the chat. Are there options for additional organizations to help with technical assistance in Oakland through the Oakland program? I don't know if we have an answer.
Yes,
Yes.
I answered it in the chat.
Oh, great.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
I mean, the real key to the local program, and honestly to the state's program too, is having deep connection to as many even granular neighborhood-based organizations that are working directly with tenants that are most in need of this help. We know that a large percentage of folks that used the CARES rental assistance programs in Santa Clara County and in Oakland did not do so through an online portal. They still needed somebody to really kind of directly work with them to submit an application, to understand what kind of verification was needed. Although, as Jessica said, both programs are going to try to make that as low barrier as possible in terms of the documents. But yes, absolutely reach out to me in Oakland or elsewhere, even in the Bay Area, and I can connect you with the folks that can get you kind of the information you need for the network and to be a part of it.
Thank you. And Bruce, I don't know if I understand the question. Will these services be available outside the confines of your county/city? What did you mean? I know that was a while ago. Bruce, you'll have to unmute. There you go.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm I got two meetings rolling at the same time. So I'm just wondering, with the support services that you were talking about with LISC, is that for those folks that applied, is it only for their constituency, for their area, or is it, you know, could they cross borders?
So one of the big benefits of the state program is that we do have we have a lot of geography. So if you're in an option A, there's a lot of flexibility in there. And we're actually doing some coordinating work with some of our tribal partners also to help them implement their funding. Or I don't know that we're doing any of the implementation for them. We're just helping support them and give them, additional resources to address that. So I think there's a lot of flexibility there. One thing we really don't want to do is force people to do multiple applications. So submitting a state application and then saying, yeah, you actually need to go over here. That's not a good approach for maintaining folks and giving them, making this accessible to them really. So there will be a little bit of kind of geography navigation that needs to happen right at the front end. But I think, for folks who are in that kind of option A category, there's a lot of flexibility, not a lot of border challenge.
And then what about tenants who have moved during COVID and have rental arrears or needs in 2 locations or 2 jurisdictions?
So that one is challenging. So your current scenario is pretty straightforward. So if you have rental arrears and you moved, say you moved in June or July, you moved to a new unit in another place, someplace maybe, where you had family or whatever additional support networks, and quickly fell behind again because the economic scenario had not changed. The current protections are very, very clear, very straightforward. We can assist with that. In regards to debt owed on a unit that you are no longer occupying, that's a little more challenging. The federal program didn't really give good guidance on how to deal with that. And I'm going to actually take that a little bit farther. And Joanne, would love to have insight from you on this also, because I think one of the challenges that we're also seeing is that a lot of households did everything and anything they could to pay rent. And that meant credit card debt, that meant payday loans, that meant borrowing from friends and family, that meant borrowing against their personal business if they had a personal business. It meant really, loading themselves up with a lot of debt that is technically rental debt, but that is not clearly addressed in any of the legislation on how to handle that. And so, I would kind of group all of that together, that previous unit rental debt along with this kind of other consumer style rental debt as to saying, I don't know that we have a good answer. And Joanna, I'd love to get your insight.
Yeah, so I think you're right. I mean, as with so many pieces of this, it's incredibly complicated. And, I think we both, Jessica and I, overuse the word nuance when we talk about this program, because, and what leads to someone possibly becoming homeless is also a very individual set of circumstances for most people, right? So trying to get at homelessness prevention with this money is hard because it's very narrow in its scope in terms of what it's statutorily permissible to be used for. So what we're working with jurisdictions is to, and the other piece I will say about the statutory limitation around this is only 10% of the overall bucket of money can be used for either admin or what's called housing stabilization, which is all the other pieces that actually keep someone from becoming homeless, right? That's the case management, it's the paying for things similar to what Jessica is talking about. It's legal services if they need to fight an eviction. And it's very limited in terms of this particular funding source. So we're working with jurisdictions to use some of their previously allocated CARES dollars, whether it's CDBG CARES dollars or ESG dollars, to kind of, and frankly, philanthropic dollars that have come into these already established programs to really fill some of those gaps that this, that this program is just going to be too narrow in its scope, just given the statutory language to really do. So, I mean, I don't know that that's a great answer to the question, but, trying to find some workarounds with some other funding sources is really, I think what we're left with is a solution to situations like that.
And I'd say that is in line with what we're doing also. We're really encouraging folks who have CARES Act emergency solutions grant dollars to look at those whenever possible to address this homelessness prevention, including kind of unpaid back rent from a previous unit. And then, you know, we've got questions into HUD and we've got questions into the US Treasury about this consumer debt load that we know households have, but that we don't have a path, a good clear path to assist on, you know, and really understanding that that is going to have a much longer impact on household stability, housing stability, economic stability, recovery, and everything, if that isn't addressed in some way.
Thank you. There's one more question. Yes. Where can I find the statutory limitations defining prevention of homelessness?
Well, it's not, it's a little bit of a different question. I just put in there the FAQ from and the guidance from the Treasury Department that answers some of those questions. I'm hoping, I was just looking quickly that that's the right PDF. If not, I'll send it to Sarah to share with the group. But the limitation is really in the December coronavirus relief package, around 90% having to be used only for rental assistance and utility payments. And the rest, what fits into the rest of that category, I can send you, but it's really outlined primarily in a document from the Treasury Department that says what those other housing stabilization, what is the definition of some of those other housing stabilization services. But more guidance, I mean, is coming from the Federal Treasury Department. They give a lot of examples in their current frequently asked questions document, but it's not as clear. There's not that's one particular area in terms of that 90-10 split that I think they haven't been as clear as they need to be about.
Thank you. Are there other questions that folks have? We do have time. Okay, so I want to let everybody know that we will be sending by email to everyone who registered today the recording of today's presentation, the presentations themselves, the Spanish versions of both presentations. And I believe that both Joanne and Jessica's contact information may be at the end of each. So you can feel free to reach out to them with other questions or concerns. And yeah, I just want to thank everyone for participating today. I think, well, I learned a lot, and I think it was, as Jessica said, really helpful to hear feedback from people living in different parts of the state, and all of us trying to figure out how to make this work. I guess I just want to frame as we're closing up, and thank you, Bruce, for having that larger conversation in the chat, because I think all of us hoped, at least I did at the beginning of this pandemic, that this would be an opening for us to create a new economic reality and economic system that community land trusts and partners are trying to birth every single day. We haven't yet seen that. We're still operating under the same assumptions of those who have capital and banks they're most prioritized, I think. So I just want to thank everyone for all the work that you've been doing through this really hard time, those working in different government agencies and nonprofits and everything that tenants have done to just keep, I'm going to cry, to keep themselves afloat. This has been a lot. So I just thank you everyone for all the work that you've done, and we'll get through this. Thank you all.
Thank